Little did I know that I was going to get the phone call from my dad to let me know that my mom died. Why me? Why did this happen? We're a good family. We're a happy family. You just ask so many questions. My mom had painted her nails that night. And then my father passes away about 5 hours later. And what I've recognized is God does not deliver us from hardships. He delivers us through hardships. So when my parents died, I vividly remember laying on the bed next to my Auntie Linda, and I literally said to her,
"Hey, welcome back to another episode of Good Grief. Today, I'm joined by Lauren Sisler out over in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama. Really pumped to hear her story of how she's actually fallen in love with a story, which might sound completely strange to you, after losing both her parents at a young age. And I think today is going to be truly inspiring for you. There's going to be heaps of practical nuggets. And Lauren's not afraid of the camera or the microphone because she is an ESPN reporter. And so I'm going to be throwing her some curveball questions, which is usually her role. So, Lauren, I want to say welcome to the show. So good to have you here. It's been fun hanging out with our kids and getting to know each other and a whole bunch.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
So fun. I feel like we obviously met for the first time last week via Zoom. And here we are getting to chat and share stories and share life experiences. And it's an honor to be here. And I love the word heaps. You use the word heaps. I think that's so cool.
It's super Aussie. There's heaps and there's keen. I don't know if you guys
I'm keen
know
on
that
you
word too much, but
like I'm keen.
Yeah, you might say that.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I've heard the
and
word.
So we'll say I'm heaps keen. So that often is a thing.
Oh, wow. Learning something new. Heaps keen. Okay. I'm in it to win it. Let's go.
Hey, I know you've had a massive day, back-to-back meetings. You've just released your book, Shatterproof. So you've been all over the country. I saw you running around New York from show to show, Good Morning America, all of the places and the people that, like, even here in Australia, we know about, like on the other side of the world, we know about those things. Congratulations on the book, first of all.
Thank you.
How has it been launching that?
Oh, it has been an amazing journey, amazing process. One that I have said this before, labor of love. Literally, you have this idea to write a book, and then you got to figure it out. And there's a lot of figuring out to do. Okay. Didn't know a whole lot about what it meant to be an author. I'm a conversationalist for a living. I don't do a whole lot of like long form writing. And so
Totally.
Finding the right people, the right team of people to help me put this all on paper, to get it down, to get it drafted, to get it worked. I kind of looked at it like as a clay pot, and you're just molding it. And then you have this beautiful work of art. Talk about emotional roller coaster, the ups and downs. There was a lot of sadness, but also a lot of joy, a lot of aha moments, a lot of healing that has come out of the process that I am so grateful for.
Wow.
And, I have to remind myself as I sit here too, I've been, as you mentioned, doing all these different media appearances. And it's a lot because I am knee deep in football season right now. And for me, that's college football. I'm traveling 4 days out of the week, Thursday through Sunday, rinse and repeat, while also managing a 15-month-old. And I have to stay grounded in all of that and recognizing like this is not a sprint. It is a marathon. Pace yourself, Lauren. Pace yourself. And so I've had some of those moments where I've had to remind myself a lot.
That's such a good word for just grief in general, to pace yourself. And like, there's no wonder that you're wearing the sparkly, purple glitter suit, because you're a superhero already just by those accords, being able to balance and juggle all of that. And then also, like, I'm curious to know, talking about your story, your grief story as well, over and over and over again through the book and through all of these guest appearances and interviews. Has that brought up things that were unexpected? Has it caught you off guard at times? Like, what's that experience been like?
Yeah, it's definitely brought up a lot of emotions because, in the process of the book, I'm digging up a lot of things. And so there is this healing process that comes with it. But then all of a sudden you get asked more and more questions, and the curiosity, and people want to know, and I'm digging up even more. And so it has been a process that has continued to drive conversations and really to drive internal conversations within my own mind, and just trying to understand the why and how did we get here. And I think that's been like the coolest part of the process, because while it's been obviously emotional, it's also been so like exonerating in so many ways, so freeing. And I think that's the beauty of it too, is when you navigate life and you kind of go through these stages of grief and shame and then acceptance and anger and everything in between, you recognize first of all, it's all part of it. And there's no timeline. And that's what I encourage people. Like, look, your timeline, totally different than mine. And, let's knock down that comparison game, because people are like, oh, well, my tragedy and trauma is so different than yours. And there's no way that, I can relate to yours, but your experiences and your trauma is your trauma. And I think that is where, I want to just encourage people, kind of meet them where they're at, but recognizing like,
so good,
when you go through this process of just sort of opening up, and you get asked questions and you answer questions, and then you even get to ask yourself more and more questions, it only drives the conversation deeper. And I think that's what I've loved the most about this process, is that everyone asks questions, and some of them are the same, some of them are similar, but a lot of them are very different, or at least warrant a different response, or even an opportunity for me to sit and go, And I think even when I talked to you last week, I was sitting there thinking in my head, oh my gosh, like we haven't really talked about this part of it. I'm so excited, so excited to dig in deep on certain areas that we really haven't gotten to dig into in this whole media run so far.
Yeah, so good. And the media, it can be very hit and miss. And it's just like people in general, right? They're sometimes prepared. They've walked with people through grief, sometimes not. And so I can imagine there's a vast difference between some of those interviews and appearances where you're like, that was a really like honest, deep conversation. Other ones, they were just asking questions and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm excited to dig in. Can you just tell us about your parents and that, what led to that pivotal moment in your life? Can we just dive straight in there?
Yeah, my parents were very loving parents. It was a household that on the outside, everyone would look at. Happy household, successful family. Everyone's got it figured out, right? And I think that's...
And a happy Christian household, right? Coming from Alabama.
Christian household. Now, I will say I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. So we were in the like rural parts of the states, the rural part of the state of Virginia. But yeah, grew up going to church every Sunday. It was always, parents tucked me in before bed every single night before I left for college. Literally, I'm 17 years old, going off to college, and my parents are still tucking me in at night and saying our prayers. And through faith and determination, all things are possible. And so we sort of were the blueprint for what you would assume is how you do life, and how you do life as a Christian, how you do life with faith and with God sort of guiding the light. And I think for me, I felt like my childhood was a great childhood. And I loved having that support. I loved having the support of both my parents, my older brother, Alan. I was a gymnast growing up. I sort of had the hopes, goals, dreams, aspirations of becoming a collegiate gymnast, earning a scholarship. And so that really became my dream.
Wow.
And what I chased after for years and years and years, the blood, sweat, and tears and the hours that I put in the gym, and the traveling and the injuries and the setbacks and all the things that go into being an athlete and being a competitive athlete. And finally getting that opportunity when Rutgers University called and said, hey, which by the way, for those of you not in the United States, Rutgers, the state university of New Jersey, I'm a Virginia gal going off to New Jersey, total culture shock. What is this place? But also a place I felt I could call home, Ryan. And it was a place that I felt like, I might not fit in. I might be a little bit of an outcast with my accent and everything, the y'alls that, I drop over here. But I felt like it was a place that I could call home and that really accepted me for who I was. And, being different isn't always a bad thing. So I signed my letter of intent.
Totally.
And here's the thing, when you make this commitment, and when I made this commitment to Rutgers, this is an investment that I put in for years and years and years, but this is not just for me. This is for my family. This is a financial ticket, the ticket to helping with some of the financial struggles my family was facing, and really was supposed to be the ticket that helped me get into med school, get med school, paid for, at least partially paid for. And achieve my dreams as being, a sports doctor. That's what I was really, really hoping for.
Right.
And life was going as scripted. I'm at Rutgers. We're still talking on the phone every night, calling my parents, burning up the phone lines. And
virtually tucking you in.
Virtually tucking me in. Yes, that's exactly right. And so, I mean, life was going well. It was an adjustment, of course, going to Rutgers and figuring this thing out. But I was loving life and enjoying, this new life. I was 8 hours from home, but life was good. And
the prime of your life. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and you go off and you set out and you have these dreams and you think, wow, like the world awaits me. And I'm so excited to do this life. And you're kind of doing it on your own, but you also, like, for me, I'm still tethered to my parents. They're still there supporting me, loving me, coaching me through life from a distance. And so things were going as planned.
And so, yeah. And so what happened from that point? Like, things are going as planned, prime of your life, talking every day.
Yeah.
What happened next?
So second semester, I'm studying for exams, midterms. As I mentioned, I was doing pre-med courses. And I remember talking to my parents on the phone. I called my mom. She answered the phone first. And we were talking about gymnastics. And then she handed the phone off to my dad. And he had just celebrated his 52nd birthday. And it's pretty cool because I have the card that I had actually given him for his 52nd birthday, or mailed to him on his 52nd birthday. And I knew there was some financial struggles that my parents were happening. And in this card, I talked about just, loving my dad and we're going to work through this, and leaning into God and leaning into faith and saying, just keep praying, we're going to get through this as a family. And then I remember putting like, P.S. one day when I become a doctor, I'm going to buy that truck that you always wanted. And so it's kind of crazy just thinking about, like, where we were as a family at that moment in time. And while things probably for my parents seem very dismal now reflecting on it, it was unbeknownst to me. And at the time it was just encouraging my parents, and we were fighting and we were getting through it. And the finances were in a little bit of disarray, but it wasn't anything that just,
from what you understood,
from what I understood. Right? That we're just getting through it. They're going to figure it out. Everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, totally.
And so, that was a special, time for me, like kind of just encouraging my dad and knowing, like, hey, we're going to get through this. And so you saw that glimmer of hope in that card. When I look back at that glimmer of hope. And little did I know that night I was going to get the phone call from my dad to let me know that my mom died. And it was just the strangest thing, because you wake up, it's the middle of the night. I just talked to my parents. Like, what happened? And I think it was just shocking when dad tells me, hey, your mom died. I need you to call your brother and then get on the next plane you can. And I'm just like, what? Like, this makes no sense. And so I frantically book a plane ticket after minutes and minutes and almost hours of being on the phone with the airline company. Keep in mind, this is 2003. Things were a lot different back then in terms of access.
Totally.
So then I got to figure out, get a plane ticket, get a ride to the airport. I get to the airport. My plane touches down in my hometown in Roanoke, Virginia. And had not talked to my dad at this point because he was at the hospital taking care of things. So when I'm running outside, I'm looking everywhere. And instead, my uncle Mike and my cousin pull up. And again, my mind is telling me, well, my dad's probably still taking care of things. We're going to get in the car. We're going to drive. We're going to go see my dad. And so as we start driving out of the airport, I finally work up the courage. I said to my Uncle Mike, Uncle Mike, I just want to see my dad. Where's my dad? And he just pulls the car off to the side of the road, can still feel the gravel up underneath the tires as he puts it in park. He looks at my cousin, and then he turns around and looks at me and says, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad's passed away too. And it was just like, what? And I still can feel where I was at in the backseat of that car, just kind of leaned back, almost slumped over. And it was like I'd already cried myself out just because I was so sad. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go see my dad. He's going to make everything okay. And then here we are. And now my dad is no longer with us. Gosh. And I'm just like in complete shock. How did we get here? How did this happen? And I think that was probably even more grueling, is that nothing was clear. Nothing was understood. There were so many questions. And for so many years, those questions remain unanswered. But a lot of that was on me because I was so afraid.
Why so?
To dig and answer those questions. So my parents were going to a pain management doctor. My mom had degenerative disc disease. My dad had chronic back pain. Dad also served in the military, suffered with some PTSD, was also an alcoholic. And that was something I knew as a kid, but I didn't understand what it was, like no comprehension of like what this thing actually is. And so, just trying to kind of navigate and sort of just, doing life, kind of compartmentalizing things, but never really understanding the magnitude of all of it. And so,
I'm just trying to understand that backseat car moment where you're anticipating one outcome, that your mum's died, and anticipating that you're going to see dad, and now you've been told this other news. How does that truly hit you? It's expecting one thing, getting a total other expectation that compounds. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's far greater than that. How does that affect you in that moment? Is it, this isn't real? Is it deep, like anger? Is it, I want to punch something? Is it real, solemn, quiet, still? What was it for you?
I think the initial emotion as I'm sitting in the back seat is pure shock. Like, am I hearing this right? Like, pinch me, like wake me up, do something, shake me, get me out of this nightmare that I'm living right now. I think though, in the stages of grief, you do experience a lot of different emotions. And I definitely would say anger set in eventually after the shock kind of like wore off. And I don't know that the shock ever really wears off, but there were those moments of grief. And then the shock, and then the anger, the why me? Why did this happen? We're a good family. We're a happy family. We do all the right things, right? And then you just ask so many questions. And I think that to me was the hardest part because nothing was clearly defined, even in those early moments of discovering that both of my parents died. And then it would just be months before we as a family would even start to uncover the truth. But the crazy thing is, Ryan, I literally ran from reality so hard and so fast that I literally deserted any comprehension and idea that my parents were battling prescription drug addiction.
Wow. So did it come down to the fact that it was an overdose?
So basically with the process, it took about 90 days, actually 90 days on the dot is what the deadline of when the toxicology reports were supposed to be complete, with sort of the investigative outline of what they discovered. So both my parents died of accidental overdoses. And how do you truly rule them accidental? Because, truly it's hard to get into someone's mind and to know what they were thinking when they decided to take this medication and essentially abuse it, because they were using the medication in a way that was not as prescribed. And for both my parents, it was fentanyl that ultimately took their lives. My mom was actually prescribed fentanyl. My dad had Oxycontin, but fentanyl was something that was in a pain patch for my mom. And it was a time release. Right. And so she would wear that and then every 72 hours switch it out. Well, eventually it became every 48 hours as prescribed. And I guess eventually that just wasn't enough. And the Oxycontin wasn't enough for my dad. And my dad had read online somewhere that you could literally take the pain patch, put it in the freezer, cut it open and suck on it and get the immediate high. And I think that to me, when I replay that image in my head, because ultimately that then becomes a choice. That wasn't just, you say, well, how is that accidental? Well, I think this is where you have to sort of merge this thing together. Because accidental, so for my parents, right? So we're digging into the toxicology reports and what was understood and investigated. My mom had painted her nails that night. My mom and dad had packed a cooler. They were planning to go to my grandparents' house. They were planning to continue doing life.
They had plans. Yeah, totally.
They had plans. And so you're like, okay, so how did we arrive on this? And you think, okay, so for my mom, she was sick. She obviously was very sick and in a lot of pain. And so my thought and just what I've uncovered even in this process of writing this book, Shatterproof, is that she was in a lot of pain and just needed something to ease the pain. And that's not just the chronic pain. That's like the dope sickness, right? That she's just experiencing this unbelievable pain that nothing except for that medication can touch. And so she, and I don't know if this is the first time that she did it this way, but she obviously ingested the fentanyl and, unknowingly how much she was getting, went into respiratory failure and passed away, I think long before my dad even woke up and found her. We don't quite know that exact timeline because my dad thinks she was alive, but then he wasn't really sure. And this is all what was said to the rescue squad and the people that were there responding to the call when it happened. So we're getting bits and pieces of things. And then my father passes away about 5 hours later, and you're thinking like, and so of course the question here is, well, he dies the same way that my mom did. This has to be intentional. And I think that's a question, Ryan, that I played in my head for so many years, because then you add a whole other layer. Not only do you overdose to addiction, but now is it intentional? And while they were ruled accidental, you'll just never know. But I got to tell you, and this is outlined in the book, and it really becomes the bookends to the book, is I met someone that really helped to enlighten me on the events that day. And he was the deputy that responded to the call. And it's a crazy God story how we even met. Like, oh my gosh, just insane. And I'll tell you, I'd always questioned, my mom, I never felt was intentional. My dad, I'm like, well, he must have been devastated. And absolutely. I always thought, well, was this something that was intended to happen? Like, did he take his own life? And I will say the deputy, Eric Twaits, told me, he said, Lauren, being on the drug task force, knowing what I know now that I didn't know back then when I was young and just entering into my career as a deputy, your dad died with the phone in his hands, doing everything he could to get you and your brother home. I was in Rutgers. I was in New Jersey. My brother was in Norfolk, Virginia, serving in the military. He said, that to me is not indicative of a man that wanted to take his own life. He wanted to be there for you and your brother when you got home. But unfortunately, that addiction, that pain, that suffering that he was experiencing, it got a hold of him. And there was just no way out. And, I think to me, that gives me some level of peace knowing that my dad was fighting so hard for us.
It does. It shows that intention. And, there's that throwaway hallmark kind of line, is it it's the thought that counts, but it truly is. It truly is to think about your dad and what his thoughts and actions and intentions were. Wow, what a deputy, what a person to be able to hold that space for you in such a moment.
And here's the thing, meeting him 19 years later, like what? And him remembering the details of that day so clearly.
Wow.
In details that I never even thought I would ever uncover. And I'm telling you, like when you talk about timing, like this book has been in the works for years and years. And people, you should write a book. You should write a book. But then you're like, when is the right time to write a book? I don't even know. But I'm telling you, it is so divine in how this all comes about. Because, oh, by the way, I met this deputy because I went to my old high school, spoke at my old high school, 8th through 12th graders. An 8th grader was there, a student, went home to dad, said, Dad, this ESPN reporter was there. And that son happened to be Deputy Twaits' son. And here's the irony of it all, okay? I was supposed to go speak at my high school in 2020. Pandemic, gets canceled. He would have been in 7th grade and never would have heard me speak that day.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I'm telling you, it's just like, what? Like,
it's
what?
100% divine.
I know, crazy.
Hey, thanks for sharing that.
And it goes deep. I mean, it just goes deep, but it's like, oh my gosh. Like, I can't even tell
Yeah.
you how amazing
Well,
it is that this even happened, because that wasn't even part of the story when I started thinking about writing a book, you know?
yeah, totally. Yep. 100%. I've got to know in that moment as a good Christian, good Christian family, how did that affect your faith? People lean in or they lean out? Where were you?
Ooh, the lean in, lean out thing is so real, y'all. Oh, so I mentioned to you the card that I wrote my dad, and keep praying, we're going to
Totally.
get through this. And I was always that cheerleader, like just constantly, like, we're going to get
Yeah.
through this. Footprints in the Sand was my
And
favorite
that,
poem.
yes, footprints in the sand, totally. And that card, right? I don't know if you look at it like this, but the way I see grief and loss is like there's BC and AD, or there's before grief and after grief. And so that card was before, right? That was
Yeah.
before loss, before tragedy,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
where you spoke
exactly.
about your
And,
faith
and,
and your
and, and that's
encouraging.
where I was just like leaning in, and the cheerleader and the hope and
Mm,
we got it. And then tragedy strikes. I faced the darkest day of my life. And when I needed God most, I didn't quit believing. But let me tell you, Ryan, I 1000% leaned out. It was anger. I got this. I don't need your help. And it's like I just kind of, a little bit of that salty, like bitter, like shoulder shrug.
mm.
And what a brat I was, right? Such a brat. But then it's like what I realized, and this is a mantra and something I've leaned into now as I've started to grow in my faith, because I felt that I was very strong in my faith then, but gosh, looking back, I was nowhere close to where I am now in my walk in faith. And I've got to tell you, a lot of it comes from obviously the experiences, but then meeting my now husband, our walk in faith together. When you have someone to do life with, you suddenly realize like, this is my accountability partner. And it's just been so amazing. And getting to stand by my son's crib and pray with him at nighttime and just, I just love it.
Yes.
But it's so crazy because what I've started to live by, footprints in the sand, it was then that I carried you. So meanwhile, I'm leaning out when I need God the most, when I need God to carry me the most. And here's the thing, God was carrying me all along. I might have not seen it, felt it, embraced it, but he was carrying me all along. And what I've recognized is God does not deliver us from hardships. He delivers us through hardships. And that's something I just...
Can you say that one more time?
God does not promise to deliver us from hardships, but he promises to deliver us through hardships.
So true. Wow. Mm-hmm. I got to ask you, losing both parents, how do you process and reconcile raising Mason, your 15-month-old that will never get to meet them? How have you dealt with that grief?
Oof. It's been hard. I'll tell you, I took Mason to their grave site. They're both buried there at the Veterans Cemetery, above ground in one of those columbariums. And I remember just sitting there. We were kind of sitting on the grass, and the sun was setting. It was such a beautiful day, and it was this past summer. And what a beautiful day. And he doesn't understand. He's picking up grass, like taking the flowers that we brought, like picking them apart, like just being a little boy. But oh my gosh, just sitting there, having that moment, it just hit me pretty hard that he doesn't understand this right now. But the fact that he will never know my parents, but I do, while it makes me sad that he'll never physically see them walk in his room and hug him and embrace him and kiss on him and love on him, he'll never experience that physical presence. But I do hope and pray that through the work that I do, through the outreach that I do, through the life that I live, that he will know them through me. He will know them through my story. He will know them through this book.
100%.
And that, it's very hard because,
I've got tears. I've got tears right now. I'm thinking about Mason. I'm thinking about our daughter. I'm like, we haven't visited the cemetery for my dad. It's big. It's so big. But I truly believe, we think about, like, there are multiple ways to know somebody, right? Like, you can date somebody online and not meet them, right? And so you don't have a physical, like, you don't have that physical. And this is sounds so weird, but he won't have that physical knowing, but he'll have a spiritual knowing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
he'll understand through story and through everything that you raise him in. And I think that can leave and continue to leave legacy through his life because of who they were.
Yeah, that's so good. I love it. And just even thinking about it, I actually, in this book, I dedicated it to my mom and my dad and to my husband and Mason, and then to my auntie Linda. So she's a big part of this, my mom's sister, who really helped me to understand that my parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives, through their addictions. And what's so cool about this is I actually wrote a letter to Mason. And this letter I wrote to him was back, shortly after he was born. It was July 24th of 2023. This letter to him, shortly after he was born, just, in a way that I'm so excited that when one day he'll be able to, like, pick up this afterward and read through this book and then get to this place and see this letter that I wrote to him, like, shortly after he was born. And I am just, of course I don't want to wish time away, but I'm so excited for that day when he gets to open this book and see in this book, my parents, their flaws, absolutely, but also their love and their guidance and everything they shared and how that's being passed down generation to generation. And then ultimately, now as a mom and a parent, like, how I'm getting to pass that along to Mason. So it's pretty cool.
Oh, is that letter to him short enough to read here, or should we let listeners pick the book up and read it, in their own time?
I mean, it's short enough. I've not done this before, so if you want me to, I can do it. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, okay. Let's do it. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Ooh. This one might be hard to read it out loud because I don't know that I've had the opportunity to read it out loud yet, so I might get a little emotional. But it's okay.
That's totally fine. Plenty of tears on this show.
I know. Okay. So this is in the afterword. This is at the end of the book, before I get into my acknowledgments. So here we go. Okay. So even as a kid, I knew that when I grew up, I would be a mom just like my mom. My future husband, and I'm already crying. Here we go. I'm also an ugly crier, Ryan. I'm an ugly crier.
You got this.
My future husband would be a dad just like my dad. And our kids would never have to worry about anything because we would take care of them, just like my parents always took care of me. As I was putting the finishing touches on the manuscript that would become this book, this chronicle of what I learned from my parents and what I learned about myself in the aftermath of their deaths, I became a parent myself. On July 4th, 2023, John Mason Willard was born. Parts of my heart I didn't know existed burst alive that day. I'd come full circle from being my dad's little lady Lauren to having my own little man Mason. It felt poetic that he was born on Independence Day when America celebrates winning its freedom from British rule. After so many years documented on these pages in often painful detail of being locked in a prison of denial about how my parents died, I had found my own freedom in the truth. After too often thinking of myself as less than because I had lost the patriarch and matriarch of my family, my husband and I assumed those roles in our little family. I wrote a lot on these pages about finding my identity as a child and teenager in gymnastics, and then how I found my professional sweet spot as a sports journalist. What I know now is that as fulfilling as those things were and still are, I knew the instant I became a mom that it was my life's truest calling. I've made it pretty clear that I have struggled to understand what led my parents down the desperate road they traveled as they became addicted to prescription drugs, whose devastating power they didn't fully understand. But you know what? Becoming a parent myself has made me understand my mom and dad in a deeper, more profound way than I had imagined possible when my only relationship with them was as their child. Now we share a different bond, that of being parents. And as I fall in love anew with every day with Mason, I feel a greater connection to mom and dad than I've ever known. I understand the hopes and dreams they had for my future, the sacrifices they made to help me achieve the future I dreamed about, the pride that led them to beam at every accomplishment of mine, even those in my adolescent distractions that I dismissed as not being a big deal. I always knew every day of my life that I was blessed to have them, that mom and dad loved me. I want Mason to know the exact same thing, to experience the exact same things, to want to turn to me and John when life gets rough and he gets wobbly, the way I still want to turn to my mom and dad, to fall in love with whatever his story turns out to be, the way I hope those who read mine will fall in love with theirs. I pray Mason one day reads the quote at the beginning of this section, which also appears on page 26, and doesn't just understand more about his mom's life, but feels the same way about his own life. That he draws inspiration and strength from the realization behind those words as I have. I hope these words help him live a life, as his mother has been blessed to do, that is shatterproof.
Wow. Oh, thank you for reading that. Well done. Well done. I love that you said your relationship with your parents has grown more since becoming a mum because you share a different bond now. That is such a powerful way that we can continue those bonds, and they change through loss and through grief. Thank you so much for sharing that. I hope you don't mind me continuing just for the sake of this our time and conversation, but I want to talk about John for a moment. I feel like he hasn't had enough of the spotlight right here. You guys met, you're married, you guys got married like 20-something days after us in the middle or the start of the pandemic, which is pretty cool. We both had 2 weddings, so we share so much in common. But you were really fearful to get married, you told me. And you were fearful because you had no one to walk you down the aisle. Can you just talk to me how you overcame that and what you made the day look like when it came around?
It's crazy because I share this story in the book, and it's an interesting intersection. So when my parents died, I vividly remember laying on the bed next to my Auntie Linda, and I literally said to her that nobody's going to love me and want to marry me because I don't have parents. Like, imagine that thought process, right? You lose your 2 best friends, the 2 people you love more than anything, your parents. And all you're thinking about now is who's going to marry you? I didn't even have a boyfriend. I never even had a boyfriend. Like, what are you doing, Lauren? But I've dug into that piece of it with my therapist especially and recognized that a lot of that comes from the need for unconditional love. The need for that person. Who is that person going to be that's going to fill that void, who is going to love me unconditionally till the day that we die? And I think that's where I started piecing that together and thinking about it. And for years, I ran from the idea of getting married. It was so hard for me to envision when it would happen, where it would happen, what it would look like. And every little girl dreams of getting married and putting that dress on and looking like a beautiful princess and, all those things. And I was like literally running from every ounce of vision I possibly could of what that day could look like. Part of that, I think, is you got to be with the right person. And, I dated some guys and they didn't work out. Okay. But I was so fearful for so many years, Ryan, that day when those doors flung open or wherever I might be, that I start my trail down the aisle, that instead of thinking about the man that I was about to marry and the life that we were about to start together, that all I would think about is the absence of my mom and dad. Because here's the thing, society tells you what a wedding day is supposed to look like. Here in the United States, it's your dad walks you down the aisle. I mean, that's pretty common.
Same here in Australia, right? For sure. Yeah.
Common practice. Dad walks you down the aisle. And I was so fearful that my day would just be so consumed with the loss and the pain of that loss that I just ran from it. And I didn't even want to go there and envision what it could look like. And I got to tell you, the pandemic ended up being a beautiful thing because here's the deal. I had this wedding planned out. We were planning to get married May 30th of 2020. Had invited like 250 people. We had sent this save the date out. We're getting married at the resort that Dirty Dancing was filmed. Yes. Baby and Patrick Swayze,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so you start piecing together what that day is going to look like. And 250 people, like I'm inviting like everybody in the kitchen sink. And it's like, okay.
Oh, gosh.
You realize too, I'm paying for my own wedding. So let's be real here. Like
That's a big wedding. Yeah, totally.
big wedding. But this is where I love how things came full circle. And I truly believe God stood in the gap for me that day. So pandemic happens. Basically, I'm watching the news, constantly watching the news, getting the updates. They shut the world down and we're thinking, oh, maybe 2 weeks of shutdown. Nope, not even close. And so then we make the decision, we're canceling the wedding. And what's crazy about it is we had not originally planned to get married in the church. We go to Church of the Highlands here in Birmingham, and we were planning to just do everything at this resort. And just to make it easy on everybody, not having to travel back and forth up and down the mountain. So then here's the opportunity now, as I'm being told, wedding's canceled. Now you're just going to have to do something. Plan B. What does that look like? And my husband said, I'm marrying you on May 30th, 2020. If we got to go to the courthouse, John, we're getting married. So like whatever it takes. So I think what's so beautiful about this story is that all the pomp and circumstance, all the things that I now suddenly wanted to have in a wedding day completely got derailed. But that also led me to the church to get married because that wasn't originally the plan. Now everything's shut down. And our dear friend who I work out with, Pastor Lane Schranz, like literally said, because I was like, well, we got to find someone to officiate our whatever wedding it's going to be now. And he said, sure, count me in. I got you. Where do you want to get married? And then we were like, well, I guess is the chapel at Highlands open now that, everything's being canceled? And he said, yep, if we got to do it at midnight, we'll do it. So we get to do this wedding, 8 people in the front of the church, my aunt, uncle, my cousin and my brother. And then on the other side, John's mom and dad and brother and sister-in-law. Let me tell you, when those doors flung open, I told you like God stood in the gap big time because I'm at my house getting ready, getting my hair and makeup done. And the florist walks into the house with my bouquet of flowers. And I had not met this florist. She reached out to me on Instagram and literally told me, hey, I want to do something special for you. I want to give you your bouquet. Like I want to do it for free. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what an amazing just blessing. And so we had decided that we were going to put lace from my mom's dress around the stems and then a charm that has their wedding photo, my mom and dad's wedding photo on it. So I remember when she walked in the door, I just lost it. Like I was like, oh, but when I say lost it, it was just a beautiful moment of like this. And so like not ugly cry, I had to preserve the makeup, but I had a couple tears stream down my face. I mean, come on, we got to keep the important things. A couple tears streamed down my face and I was just in awe of the beauty of this bouquet. I was like, oh, and then the tears dried up and we put the bouquet in some water. I go back to getting my hair done and my makeup and I'm feeling like I'm in this moment, like I'm in it. And so I get to the church, I start getting ready and then the doors fly open. And at this point, like, it's just me. It's me and it's our 8 family members at the front. It's Pastor Lane Schranz and a couple of photographers and that's it. And I truly believe God stood in the gap that day because he allowed me to feel the feelings. He allowed me to have that moment with my mom and dad. But when those doors opened, I wasn't sitting there feeling the vast emptiness to my left and my right.
Yeah.
I wasn't feeling the emptiness of the church. I was so focused on my husband that stood there in front of that church next to Pastor Lane, ready to marry me. Like, what an honor. And I'm like, man. And it was just such a beautiful moment because I truly do believe God stood in the gap that day. And instead of focusing on the absence of what I didn't have, I focused on what I had, what I did have. And I focused and I was able to focus on my husband. I was able to focus on this next chapter. I was able to focus on this promise and this covenant that I was about to enter into with my husband and not on all the pomp and circumstance. Because even Pastor Lane said at the end of the day, like, yes, you want your dad there to walk you down the aisle, but ultimately your Lord and Savior, your Father is God, is Jesus Christ. So at the end of the day, you can eliminate all the distractions and now focus on the one thing at hand. And that is to set forth on this promise and this covenant that you have with your husband. And I mean, what a beautiful way to start a marriage. And I got to tell
seriously.
you, never in a million years would have planned it that way. And I can imagine you probably felt the same way in your situation with your wife, with Callie.
Yeah.
Kaylee. I got it right, Kaylee.
Nice. Yeah. No, I resonate with so much of what you just said there, all the way back to that moment when you lost both of them. Immediately you're thinking, well, no one's going to love me. Who wants to be with me? And I truly feel they are just the thoughts of the enemy. That's deception. And when you reach that full circle moment, walking through the church, what we realized, I'm not sure about you, is that, you know, we had all these people telling us how to try and do our wedding because of our parents, like you need to honor them. But at the end of the day, it's about you and your husband and God and that covenant. It's not about our parents. It's kind of, I thought of it like, oh, how does my dad want it to be? And Kaylee thought about how does her mum want it to be? But ultimately it's our decisions because we're the ones choosing each other in the sight of the Lord. And it's just so interesting hearing it from your perspective as well. Because I'm just like, when I look back, I think about those thoughts. Did you have the question, because I did, will your husband, your future husband, understand your grief? Like, did you have those questions? When I meet that person, how will they understand my grief, my loss?
Such a great question. Oh, yeah. Because I do think that with loss, you know, he's still got both of his parents and, you know, such a wonderful blessing to have them. And they're such a big part of our lives. And it's such a gift. There was that fear. Is he going to understand it? So not only is he going to understand the loss and the void of not just one parent, two parents, but then also like, is he going to understand the nature of it and the addiction
and how
part
to care
of it?
for you.
How to care for me, how to understand my fears, because I'm so rooted in a lot of these fears based on what I've experienced, the trauma that I've faced, and the experiences not only in their absence, but even when they were living, the fears that start to engulf you. So yeah, I had so many questions about how he was going to respond to that.
And then what about like, because obviously you've suffered these tragedies, but that doesn't mean John hasn't suffered his own griefs in different areas. Did you think about like the one-sidedness of like, woe is me, what about me? But then how do you care for him and the things that he needs?
Yeah, because it's easy, as we talked about before, you can get so caught up in like the comparison game, right? Here's the blueprint. Here's how you're supposed to respond to tragedy and grief. And this is how I did it. So now you've got to do it this way. But holding space for his experiences. And it is easy to get caught in the comparison game sometimes and the keeping score. Well, I went through this and I did this. And, you know, especially when you get in like the heated debates, right? We all go through them as married couples. There's always
every good marriage does.
Every good marriage right? Every good marriage goes through it. Let's not kid ourselves. But holding space for that and knowing that you know, his experiences are his experiences, and knowing also, and I'll say this, there is going to come a time where he's going to experience that loss and we're going to have to walk through that together. And while I want to impart my, you know, my wisdom, my words of encouragement, I also know that I have to have space to let him experience it the way that he will experience it. And that's just loss in general in life. And, you know, I think that that's where when you make that promise to one another, you do become one. And I inherit his baggage. He inherits my baggage, good, bad, or indifferent. And, you know, I think that you just have to kind of walk through it together and recognize it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy, but you just, you take it in stride and you just trust that it's always going to be a learning process and that growth is always in front of you. And I always say work in progress. And I think that is the beauty of a relationship and getting to do life with someone else and knowing that you got them by your side. They're going to be someone to lean on. And, you get to learn and grow from one another. And gosh, like if we had exact identical experiences, like no fun.
Oh, that'd be horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Let's lean on each other for our
man.
experiences and what we've experienced, and love on one another and walk each other through this. And again, it's not going to be perfect. It's not linear. Let's be real. Grief is not linear. I kind of use this
Totally.
illustration, when you're grieving something and you're trying to explore and understand that grief and that loss. It's like cracking open the door. You're peeking around the corner, but then you get scared and you're like, nope. And you shut that door. And then each time you might just peek it open a little bit further, and you get more and more brave to eventually walk through that open door to fully understand and consume what it is that has just taken your breath away and weighed you down for whether it's days, months, years, whatever that may be. And then you find that level of freedom that comes with that. And I think it's just such a beautiful thing, and it's a gift. But it takes work, and it takes a lot of work and time and patience. And we're in a society of instant gratification, my friend. We all want it now, don't we?
That's right. Oh, that is so good. When you just said there that we inherit each other's baggage, he's got baggage that you inherit, you've got baggage that he inherits. It just made me think of and then you get married and you travel somewhere and someone packs heavier than the other person, right? Like, I'm going to be the first to say that my wife has the biggest suitcase, right, than I do. And there's no separating the fact that I still have to help all of those bags go through the airport, go through security, check in, into the Uber or the taxi or the bus. I don't just lift my little bag, I lift hers as well, and she lifts mine. And so that's I thought you just brought a beautiful picture together as how we inherit each other's baggage and we carry it together. So, Lauren, this has been incredible. I know you've got a 15-month-old that's having a nap and about to wake up. Our 6-month-old is asleep, I believe, praise the Lord. And so we'll wrap this here. I'm going to put all the links to follow you because people need to follow you. There's way more to your story than what we've talked about here. And then your book as well, Shatterproof. Thanks so much for hanging out. You're amazing.
This has been amazing. And you asked me in this process, have there been things that I've thought about or been asked about that have jogged my memory or pushed me further into my thinking and understanding? And this one, Ryan, has certainly done that. From our conversation last week to where we are now, I have to tell you, this has just been such an enlightening conversation. It's such a beautiful gift. And I just hope that as we've had this conversation, we meet people where they're at, whatever grief and shame they're experiencing in their life, that you too can become shatterproof, that you can build up that resilience, and that one day you're going to walk through that door with courage and with bravery, and you're going to stand on the other side and be like, I did it. And I'm just grateful for you. I'm grateful for your platform and the great work that you're doing, bringing people closer to God and their walk in faith. And if there's anything I could do to continue helping your people do great things, would love to do it. Reach out to me at Lauren Sisler on all the social channels. Hit me up on my website. I get all my emails, so don't you worry. If you want to reach out, hit me up. Would love to chat. And
so good.
Hey, maybe Ryan, we have a part 2 of this conversation.
I'm totally down for it. 100% totally down. Shatterproof part 2.
Let's go.
Appreciate you, my friend.
See ya.
Let's go. Hey, I appreciate you tuning in for this episode, and for all of our loyal Good Grief family, thanks for hanging out. If it's your first time here, welcome. I really hope you found Lauren's story as valuable as I have. We're going to do part 2 at some point because, man, there's more to this. And if you haven't yet, we would love if you could just rate the podcast. Give it 5 stars because it shows it to more people that are grieving. And you know what grief is like. I know what grief's like. And I don't want anyone to walk this road alone just as much as you do. So be blessed. And until we see you on the next episode, bye for now.